Hello, and welcome to the FI Entrepreneur, Financial Planning for the Risk Taker. This podcast will show you how to achieve FI through entrepreneurial pursuits by developing a well-calibrated and thought-out plan for risk management so that you can maximize the rewards.
Hosted by certified financial planner, enrolled agent, and serial entrepreneur Ben Martinek, this is the FI Entrepreneur, Financial Planning for the Risk Taker.
The information presented in this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. None of the content is presented as investment advice. Consult your financial professional before acting on any of the information presented in this show. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. It's Andrew and Ben with the FI Entrepreneur, as you already know. We're going to introduce you to one of the other co-hosts on the show, Andrew Bensavenga. Bensavenga is kind of a fun last Italian name. I don't know if Andrew actually even knows this, but it's Italian, which means good coming or welcome. So I suppose with that, maybe Andrew, welcome Bensavenga to the show. How you doing, Andrew?
Thank you. I'm very well. That's probably one of the best introductions I've ever had. And the welcome part is kind of new news. I had heard that before in the past, but it's always a good refresher. My Italian heritage definitely comes out from time to time.
Well, if you can't pick it up, Andrew's got a New York accent and a background. And so we love having him on the team and on the show. You guys are going to enjoy him immensely. And I think with that kind of introduction, Andrew, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, especially as it relates to entrepreneurship and risk-taking and the like? What brings you to the show today?
Sure. Entrepreneurship is definitely in my blood. It runs in the family. My father has a long history with entrepreneurship, and I guess inadvertently, I kind of picked that up. I had started working for him as an elementary school student, stuffing envelopes in the living room table and just watching him grow businesses and helping him do so. After university, I helped put together a real estate information business with him, and then really inadvertently branched out on my own in entrepreneurship. I had moved to Korea to teach English as a second language, and I didn't really think of that as an entrepreneurial move, but that is really what it wound up being. I had my main high school job, but I also wound up amassing a stable of private lessons on the side, which wound up exceeding the income that I made with the high school position. From there, I branched out of the teaching job and into the hospitality industry, actually, and helped to create a craft beer company in Busan, South Korea, and help build that. So that was really my first major foray into entrepreneurship. And then after that, it was kind of time to reinvent myself again after a few years there. And that's how I met Ben. I decided that I was kind of done with the craft beer industry and wanted to work in the financial industry, where I am now, just learning and always growing.
No, well, that's great, Andrew. So we're going to have to pick into this a little bit more. So you grew up on the outskirts of New York City, then worked behind your dad in a number of pursuits. We'll have to inquire as to some of your dad's pursuits because it just seems fascinating. What's also equally interesting in your story is eventually you went international and have been living internationally for a rather long period of time now. Is it 12 to 13 years that you've been in South Korea?
Yeah, something like that. We always say it's 6 months at a time. I came out here in 2007. As like maybe 24 years old, something like that. And you get these 1-year contracts. So it's always, one more year. And you wake up one day, for a lot of us long-term expats, and you've been here for 13 years. And you're like, I've got a wife and a son and a little business here. And you're like, when did this happen? Whether you plan it or not, life definitely winds up happening to you. And for me, with my background, it did wind up being through that entrepreneurial lens. The love of dining and food brought me to the hospitality thing. I had gotten into that. I was selling sausage on the street. I had a hobby as I was teaching. I would go home. I couldn't get the food that I loved. I would go home and make sausages in my apartment. I loved doing it. I wanted to keep on doing it, but I couldn't eat these kilos and kilos of sausage. So I had a group of friends and I would sell them. And they're like, oh, you should do this. You should do this. I was like, you're crazy. But an opportunity came along, and I wound up being the sausage guy and the restaurant guy at the brewery. And, one thing leads to another, and you just kind of wind up where you are at the end of the day sometimes.
Yeah, so maybe entrepreneurship could just be described as a bit of an adventure, right? Or a quest. You set your sails, if you will. I do some sailing, so you'll learn more about that later as an audience. But You set your sails, and not to necessarily say you have to go wherever the wind takes you, because you have control in a sailboat as to where you go. But there is still, it's kind of the wide open unknown, and where's it going to go?
Yeah,
Is that in your experience so far?
definitely. I think it's definitely important to be open to what the wind puts in front of you. And certainly as a younger man, I didn't do as much foreplanning and forethought with all of this. Moving from the craft beer industry into the financial industry, I was a little bit older. That was a much more conscious move. And then the moves that I would make in the future. So you definitely learn from the past and you remain open to the future, is just how I see it.
No, that makes sense. Well, and then for your dad, you had some experience and he's had some entrepreneurial pursuits. Just out of curiosity, I mean, what's an example? You said something in real estate he's been involved with?
He was involved in a major real estate company in the Northeast called Stop and Shop. I don't know if you have that out by where you are, but he was like the regional vice president for real estate acquisitions in the Northeast. But it was funny. Even that he did in an entrepreneurial manner. He was like reasonably high up in the organization, but he had his office out of the house, which back in the 80s and 90s, that was pretty much unheard of. We had the modem 1440 kilobytes per second. Forgive me for my imitation of that. But I really got to see him as he did all these things. And even as he did that, he always had the side businesses, golf products here, nutritional supplements. And then the thing that I worked with him on was a real estate information company focused on people that wanted to move to the Carolinas. So I helped him build that together. And that was a really great bonding experience between the two of us. And just really my first exposure to how to build that kind of business when it just wasn't done as much. And so really just invaluable experience.
Yeah, so and it looks like it's a seeking of opportunity. Your dad always had one eye on the project at hand and another eye at the next investment opportunity or the next thing he could be working on, it sounds right. So
yeah. And I'm very much the same. Even as I've moved into bona fide finance and working with you, I've still kept my finger in the pot, so to speak, where even as I got out of the bar and all that, I wound up at the same time starting a small craft meats business where I've partnered up with another guy. And, not often, but, a couple times a month, we'll make a couple batches of sausage or some bacon, something like that. And just really serving a community of expats out here that don't have a lot of other options and just having a little fun, making a little money on the side.
no, well, good for you. Every time you show photos or tell us about your cooking expeditions, you make me hungry. So I haven't had any of it because Andrew lives in South Korea and we can't just meet up and get together. But we're looking forward to the day when that happens and we can eat some of your grub because it looks delicious. So Andrew is always in the kitchen cooking something.
To my wife's chagrin sometimes. She wants her kitchen back.
Good stuff. Let's move into a conversation, Andrew, on financial independence. The show is about FI entrepreneur, and really our take is there's different ways to achieve financial independence. You might already know as an audience, you could get financial independence just through saving or investing large sums in the broader market, whether it's through a 401k, IRA, or even just some taxable accounts. So these would be stocks and bonds. Certainly a very good way to ultimately achieve independence. But as some folks have described it, it's a bit of a crockpot approach. It takes more time and the returns perhaps as high as one might expect. You could alternatively pursue more real estate focused ventures, whether that's single family homes that you're acquiring and pursuing, or maybe larger deals like a multifamily unit or an apartment building, or even just a diversified portfolio or fund that manages that for you rather than you individually managing it. So that certainly has more promise to it, although a greater responsibility and risk. Whereas there's really a third tier option in our mind and is promoted too within the FI community of ultimately starting and running your own business and achieving success really exclusively in this entrepreneurship. There's some degree of entrepreneurship, I think, in certainly the real estate space, but running your own business is probably the best example of entrepreneurship. And so our show is really about achieving financial independence by being your own business owner. Let's talk about that a little bit. I think that is certainly promising and an opportunity and what I'm seeing firsthand in my own life. But what is financial independence, Andrew?
Financial independence, and you spoke of it, originally came from the FIRE movement. And the general definition of that originally was financial independence, retire early. But as the movement has gained strength, the retire early part has dropped out a little bit. And this is mostly because most people don't actually retire. Most people get to the point of financial independence and then they're able to move away from, typically it is a standard 9 to 5 job that got them there, and then move more into an entrepreneurial thing or pursue other interests that they've had to put on the back burner. And we're both of the mind that there's no real reason that you have to wait until you finish your primary job. You don't have to wait for pure financial independence to get into that entrepreneurial space. We believe that you can start it and be moving there, and the entrepreneurial pursuit can really be one of the linchpins that gets you there. Because at the end of the day, a lot of times the things that have the biggest payout for a person are those self-enriching pursuits, such as entrepreneurialism.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we've seen it with a number of clients who are purposely pursuing FI. And again, this is kind of a retire early, but it's really more of a work optionality. We're choosing to aggressively accumulate wealth, and rather than cutting ties with our employment or employer or our career into your late 50s or early 60s, maybe giving yourself an opportunity to pivot by the time you're in your late 30s or early 40s. And not uncommonly in this arrangement, folks will aggressively save and basically do all the savings that they need to do for retirement in their 20s and 30s and accumulate a small nest egg that then they can just park away and let stew for the next 20 years and have the security to then pivot into something of their own venture where the need for it to produce significant income isn't as high, simply because we don't now have to put money aside in savings. We've already done that. And then the value in making that pivot is you're working for yourself, not for somebody else. And you're pursuing your own interest. And presumably you're able to control when you work and when you don't. Now, we will talk in the show how that can be challenging, because as I think anybody might know who is already running a business, you don't always just get to say how the business goes. I mean, ideally we will, and I think we all should be working towards that, but it certainly doesn't happen automatically. But we think, the best combination of life planning and financial planning really comes together in the intersection of running and having your own business. And so that's how we want and think you should achieve financial independence. So what makes for financial independence? Like, what do we get, Andrew, in your mind from having achieved this? Like, why should anybody seek out financial independence?
In my opinion, and in our general understanding of it, financial independence does give you the freedom to focus on what your real purpose is in life, and through that create the life that you really want to live. And it's only through the finances and being able to finance that you're able to do it. And this movement is certainly a little bit more of a recent movement. There's a great Edwards Jones study that shows that 2/3 of all the people who have ever lived past the age of 65 in the entire history of the world are alive today. This is mainly the boomer generation, Ben's parents, my parents. And these are the people that have always throughout their lives reinvented what it meant. So they always bucked against the status quo, and they're still doing it. So at the end of the day, they decided that money is more about freedom and security. The freedom to live life how you want it, and then the security to be protected from the unexpected. Freedom doesn't mean anything, but it's not worth nearly as much if at the end of the day you're worried about the money. So for us, financial independence is about the two of those things coming together to allow you to live the life with the purpose that you want, because the third part of that triangle of the freedom and the finances is the purpose. And so it doesn't do you much good if you go ahead and retire early if you wake up every morning and you don't really know what you want to do with yourself. So people need to have all those three things working together to have what we would consider, quote unquote, a successful, purpose-driven experience in financial independence.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a little bit of a dirty secret in the retirement business. We presume, it's your golden age, golden years. You finally get to live life as you would want to live it. You no longer have to show up to work, no alarm clocks, no ongoing commitments, no stress. That's probably one of the biggest reasons why people seek financial independence. You may be paid well, but it's usually undergoing stressful employment that's just challenging, and it wears on you and drains, and it's distracting. And even when you are home, it's still have one part of your mind or all of your mind to business. And one of the huge benefits, I think, of financial independence is hopefully the stress of your daily income has gone away. Nonetheless, in the face of losing all that, it's not uncommon for somebody as they transition into retirement in the conventional sense to struggle with mental health issues because they're now disconnected from their social networks. A lot of their purpose in life and their identity, the people that they interact with, has all been taken up and gone. And they're getting older. They're dealing with the end of life and an aging body. And even though they have everything that you might want to have from a financial perspective, they're now struggling with, getting up out of bed, dealing with depression, or what is this all about, and what am I doing, or how should I spend the rest of my life? And so, at any point in which you achieve this degree of making work optional, there has to be something to fill in the void of what previously was occupying a lot of your time and pursuits. Because whether we like it or not, work dominates a lot of what life's about for us. And part of this changeover in financial independence isn't just simply achieving it, where it's manageable financially speaking. It's realizing what that life and crafting what that life is actually going to be on the backside so that you're not too surprised. Now we can get into maybe tidbits of how you could start to take little trips into financial independence, forays. Maybe you take extended vacations or periods of time off and start to get a sense of what would this life look like once we make this transition. But yeah, we still need to find our purpose, our meaning, maintain our connections, or reestablish new ones in the transition. And I want to bring some attention back to that quote that you had led with, Andrew, about the Edward Jones study. This is just remarkable and really a statement of how much things have progressed for us as a society in the last couple hundred years. 2/3 of, as Andrew was bringing attention towards, 2/3 of the people who currently live today past the age of 65 are all of the people who have ever lived past the age of 65. It really wasn't that long ago, even just 100 years ago, that to come into older years was remarkable. And now it's just expected. And we would see a person's life being robbed short if they don't make it to at least 65, where 100 years ago, to make it to 65 would have been a ripe, long, full life for sure. And so we're dealing with these extended lifespans. In some futurist projections, we have concerns of just actually maybe how long do we live, and maybe how many different careers do you have to create and reinvent yourself as you age in life, because your current career, your initial career isn't going to get you there, but maybe even the second career or the third or the fourth career, because our interests change as we age. And so we're living in a new time. I suppose we're always living in a new time. There's really factual evidence to say we're living in a new time in which part of what constitutes the human experience for us isn't what is new territory for what was the human experience for others who came before us. But we're thinking of this pivot, Andrew, into financial independence, and it certainly has a lot of attractiveness and value. But let's talk a little bit about the risk. What keeps people back from just starting your own business? I think we could say it's risk. I mean, what do you think? Is that why people don't just go out and start their own business?
I think there's a number of reasons, risk being the first. But also, I think that people are just not conditioned to say, I'm going to go out and start something. As an educational system, we're conditioned to go in and learn how to punch a clock, standardized testing, everything else. And I don't want to get too political, but our educational system is built to create people that just kind of do one task. And so if you do this one task, it's really hard to say, okay, I'm going to go out and do it on my own after you've been working under a boss or in a corporate structure for so long. Another part of that is that idea of longevity that Ben brought up. And I think the idea that you might throw away the previous 10 years or the previous 20 years of a work history to go out and strike out on your own is scary for a lot of people. It's scary for me. When I was teaching, I was making really good money. I was saving really good money. And I had this opportunity to work in a brewery, run a kitchen. And I remember I was on the phone with the guy. I said to him, he offered it me over the phone. He's like, oh, I hear you make really good sausage. You want to come and run the kitchen for us? We're starting a brewery. And I said to him, I was like, I don't know how to do that. And he's like, oh, you'll figure it out. And we did. And I certainly do not recommend that level of just cavalierness about making these decisions. Most of this podcast is hopefully about how to make this decision in a intentional way, especially if this will be a 20 to 30 year decision for you. If you are going to make it in your midlife and probably enjoy it for the next 20 to 30 years, you want to make sure you're intentional about it. And Ben also brought up the idea of stress. Being a business owner is not always the best way to relieve stress from your life, but hopefully if you design it correctly and you've got the proper pieces in place, it will work out that way. But at the end of the day, I really think that the reason why people don't strike out on their own is just kind of like mental blocks. I think that everyone would like to be their own boss. I don't think that everyone knows how to get there. And hopefully in this podcast, we can help people get there. I do love a good quote, and I think as we do more shows, but this was a great one. And it is, between calculated risk and reckless decision making lies the dividing line between profit and loss. And I definitely believe that. I think that proper planning and intentional acts are really the difference between failure and success as a business person.
Sure. Well, and I would maybe add to that, it's the willingness to take the risk. You're not going to ever reap the reward if you don't take the risk. There is that quote out there that you'll see from time to time that the greatest risk of all is not taking one. So risk is what risk is. Sometimes you take a risk and it turns out favorably, and that's obviously what we want, but this turns out better than expected. But the thing that we're afraid of and we're concerned about is when we take a risk and things don't turn out favorably, and perhaps this blows up in your face. And so you have to manage the downside. No one is concerned about the upside of risk. That's what we all want. And if we get the things turning out better than expected, no one's like, oh, shoot, what do we do? For the most part, I mean, maybe.
I've got all these gobs of money coming in.
I know.
I don't know what to do with them. Yeah.
Yeah, my business pursuit is more successful than I ever imagined. I don't know what to do. Right? I mean,
Yeah.
I suppose that does have its own challenges and problems, but that's not what we're afraid of. What we're afraid of is like, crap, I took this risk and it's not paying out, or I've had all these setbacks, or I've had all these challenges. And just how deep or bad can it go before I got to cut my losses? It's definitely the risk we have. You got to take it. There's got to be a trial and error. There's got to be a willingness, I think, fundamentally in business as a business owner to accept losses and recognize you're going to have losses. You're going to have mistakes. You're going to have bad decisions. You're going to have things that are going to be in hindsight, be like, yeah, that was a dumb move. Shouldn't have done that. But in a lot of ways, we can't learn or know whether or not it was a dumb move until we give it a shot and try. And so a defining theme in my life, and what I think is probably going to be a defining theme in this podcast, is we learn by doing. So if you want to do this, you got to get out there and do it. There's just no other way for you to start to learn what this is all going to be for you. So yeah, part of this show is, I think, talking about these things and encouraging, I think, fundamentally, more than anything, you to jump ship or to go from the dock to the boat, or to make the leap, to take the jump. And let's venture out. And tying back to some of the themes that we were talking about at the beginning, a lot of this is just saying, life's one great big adventure. It's one great big quest. And we're going to raise our sails, and we're going to go where the wind blows us. And we're going to have our good days and we're going to have our bad days, because that's just part of life. And even once you have financial success, guess what? You're still going to have your good days and your bad days. But we're going to have the right mindset and the right mentality. And we're going to see each of these days as an opportunity for growth and challenge and improvement and a new day. We're going to see where this all leads and takes us. And in that lens and in that light, things are just super exciting, super fun, and super motivating. You want to get out of bed and see what the new day dawns and brings. So I think maybe that's a good introduction, and maybe perhaps a good way to wrap up the show. Do you have any thoughts, Andrew, as you introduce yourself to the community? What's one of the last themes or thoughts you want to leave with everybody as one of our co-hosts?
I think you really hit the nail on the head in terms of framing. I've certainly had my failures in business. I've had to close places down. We were in the middle of a business and COVID hit. We had the business open for 4 years, and one of the years, the entire last year of the business, right when we were really starting to crank, COVID hit. Everything got closed down. In South Korea, they closed everything down. As a bar, hard to make money if you got to close down at 9:00, I'll tell you. And so it was like, what do you learn from this? How do you move forward from this? How do you reframe it to not be a disaster, to be a learning experience? And I really think that one of the things that we're going to focus on in this show, and I hope that we focus on, is how to frame things, how to prepare yourself mentally, how to prepare yourself financially so that you can take a chance on yourself, which is what I've always tried to do, is I know what Ben has tried to do, because if you don't take a chance on yourself, no one is ever going to. So, I'd really like to emphasize that also.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. Yeah, there you go. I mean, if someone's going to take a chance, let it be you, because you're the most likely candidate to take a chance on yourself. Let's do it. What do we have to lose? thanks everyone for listening. Now you've got a chance to be introduced to Andrew, one of our co-hosts. You can see he's equally as entrepreneurial as your other co-host, being my wife, Deb. And we're going to launch now into more practical considerations of risk and finances, money management and business consulting and business planning. And there's just so many fun topics for us to run into. You're going to start to learn about them all. So stay tuned in and we'll see you in the next show. Thanks for listening. I hope you've had as much fun as we did. If you'd like to learn more about any of the subjects we spoke about, please visit our website for show notes, links, and more. Hit like, subscribe, or whatever button you've got in front of you to show some love. Remember, the information presented in this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only.
Remember what Teddy Roosevelt said about the person who strives greatly. If he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. Until next time, keep striving.
Thanks again, and be well.